Good morning and welcome. We're so glad to have you with us this morning. My name is Keisha Browder, and I am the CEO of Your United Way of Santa Cruz County. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. While we're waiting for others to join us, please enter your name and organization in the chat box below. We are thrilled to have you all with us today. 2020 marks the 5-year anniversary for the Youth Violence Prevention Strategic Plan. During these 5 years, we created a holistic framework for reducing youth violence and increasing youth well-being. We pushed for a preventative public health approach. We decreased silos and increased alignment and working together differently. Our community was able to leverage the plan to bring millions of dollars in grant funding to our county. We shifted the avoidance of racial equity conversations, and now equity is the core of all that we do. We also want to acknowledge the decrease of youth violence here in Santa Cruz County between the years 2014 and 2020. We know that we did not do this work alone in decreasing youth violence, but we can say that we supported community coordination for change, which is collective impact. We brought you all here today to let you know why we are committed to creating and amplifying youth voice. It is our commitment to well-being. It's our commitment to building a safe and thriving community. And it's helping our youth actively participate in community and civic engagement. 5 to 10 years from now, thanks to our youth who have been mentored, they will be engaged in our community in more meaningful ways, developing their leadership skills and elevating their voice. Imagine a community like that. Housekeeping rules. Before we get started, we want to let everyone know some of our housekeeping items. We want this to be interactive, so please use the chat box. And also want you to know that we are recording this session. Again, thank you for being a part of this work. Thank you for celebrating this with us. And thank you for relaunching what we say is how we amplify the voice of our youth. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Chloe Gentili Montgomery. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the founding director of the Santa Cruz Black Youth Empowerment Workshop. I'm super excited to be here today to see what the future of youth community organizing is going to look like in Santa Cruz.
Hello, everybody. My name is Daniel Alanis. I'm with the Santa Cruz County Office of Education. I've been involved with the Youth Violence Prevention Network for the last 3 years. My pronouns are he, his, him, sir, and Mr. One of the reasons why I'm here today is because I believe that our youth deserve way more opportunities than our previous generations. Together, we can create change that could lead to amazing things. In the first session, you will hear about the milestones of the Youth Violence Prevention Network and Project Thrive with a fireside chat from system leaders. And hear from our phenomenal keynote speaker, Dr. Sean Jenwright. We will then take a break for lunch. In the second session, we will hear from an amazing group of how youth and how they reimagine a resilient Santa Cruz County. Lastly, we will unveil the next phase of the network and how we plan to center youth in all of our work.
We heard earlier from Keisha that YVPN is committed to youth well-being and building a safe and thriving community for all youth in Santa Cruz County. During this next session, we will hear from some of the leading YVPN champions and community change makers representing behavioral health, a community-based organization, education, and justice. They will share their perspectives on how YVPN has impacted Santa Cruz County in the past 5 years. Berenice, former Watsonville Youth City Council member and former Youth Violence Prevention Network Steering Committee member. She is now an employee for the County Office of Education and will be facilitating the fireside chat.
Thank you, Chloe, for that introduction. Today, I will be moderating the fireside chat, and we will hear from 5 key members. And just to provide you a little context, the Youth Violence Prevention Network, originally named the Youth Violence Prevention Task Force, was founded in 2012 in response to an increasing rate of youth violence and several tragedies in the community. When the task force began its strategic planning process, I was actually a member of the Watsonville Youth City Council, and I was a representative on the county-wide Youth Violence Prevention Network Steering Committee, and I actually helped assist in the writing of the conclusion back in 2015. Afterwards, I had moved out of the community for school, and now I feel so honored to be welcomed back into this work and to be given the opportunity to work with youth again and with community members. So thank you all for that opportunity. But much has changed in the community since we finalized that strategic plan back in 2015. One thing that's changed is Santa Cruz County was awarded a 5-year grant from the Department of Justice, which led to the Youth Violence Prevention Network's Project Thrive. In this session, we're going to hear from Youth Violence Prevention Network and Project Thrive leaders about their perspective on the impact of the multidisciplinary collaborative work. Joining us today, we have Jorge Zamora, captain of the Watsonville Police Department and chair of the Youth Violence Prevention Network. We have Rob Dottie, juvenile division director with Santa Cruz County Probation. Jasmine Nahera, licensed clinical social worker and Santa Cruz County Children's Behavioral Health Supervisor of Adelante team, which serves youth connected to the juvenile probation system. We have Maria Rodriguez, Programs Director with the Community Action Board of Santa Cruz County, and Martine Watkins, Senior Community Organizer with the Santa Cruz County Office of Education and Santa Cruz City Council member. You can read more on each of these speakers in the bio or in the program. So let's hear from our first speaker, Jorge. So Jorge, what has the Youth Violence Prevention Network done in terms of shifting the way we work together in our community?
That's a loaded question to answer in 5 minutes. I will tell you, Berenice and everybody else, that so when I think about this group, the network specifically, I think back about 2012 that you mentioned. So tragedy was what brought us together, right? And it's really hard not to brag about this county and this collaborative because we do work so well together. And we've learned that it's not about the smartest person in the room or the smartest people in the room, it's what we do collectively, right? And you have to have, I think what we've done, and I'm very proud to say this, that we have different people in the room who look at the problem from different angles, right? Different points of views. And we have the ability to be wrong if individually, at least this is what I've seen and what I've experienced. And we don't get attacked for being wrong or for making mistakes. And I think that says a lot about our collective. I think that for us, there has been a very deep and persistent commitment to real learning about each other's organization. And not just the organizations, but we really have learned a lot about each other's, how we go from our personal lives, right? We've developed a very personal relationship with each other, which really has shown me that although, I might be a police officer and, Martine might be on the city council or might be working, we have a lot in common. We really do. And that it just blows me away how when we check our ego at the door or we check our titles at the door and we are just people, how much better we get along and how we've advocated for each other for so many years. And I think that because we advocate so well for each other, we're able to provide a better product or service to our community, right? And we're not at odds with each other. And we may not necessarily agree. I'll tell you, we don't agree sometimes with some things. But we're able to struggle forward with that disagreement and come out with a real outcome. And what I've seen from the network is that people show up and they really are vulnerable in the sense that they put themselves out there, and it gives permission to other people to also be vulnerable. And again, that while we could be ridiculed for being a certain way, when we're not, it just really, for me anyway, it places people in the network at a different level of respect for me, and I just really value the friendship and the true collaborative work that we've done. So for me, it's just we really shifted how we see each other as organizations, and that gives us the ability to provide a better service when we're out in community.
Can you talk a little bit more about how the service has changed when you're out in the community?
Well, for example, I could be out, or just an officer can be out at a call, right? And they may not want to open the door for us because they're afraid that we're immigration. But they've talked to Maria, or they've talked to somebody at cab who's told them the police is not immigration, right? And because they value and trust Maria, and Maria has advocated for us, right? Then they will open that door for us. An even better example is the only reason that we were able to get into the fields with the farm workers was because people within the Youth Violence Prevention Network advocated for us and said, these guys are not who you think they are. They are not the people that the media is saying that they are. Nobody's going to deport you, but they do want to come in here and they want to tell you about your rights. They want to bring in the consulate, and you know what? And they want to feed you, and they just want to talk to you and get to know you because that's important, right? So for us to be, if I was to go out into the fields, people were going to do one of two things. They're going to run, or they're not going to let me in, right? Mm-hmm. But when we have people, again, advocating for us to collectively really do something for community, I think that's huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's super impactful, especially now since there is a lot of fear in a lot of different communities, especially vulnerable communities. Mm-hmm. Brings up a lot of good points. Thank you so much for your answers.
Yeah, welcome.
We'll move on to now the next speaker we have is Rob. So Rob, as project director of Project Thrive, what do you think is the greatest impact of Project Thrive?
Well, thank you for hosting this event, and I appreciate everyone that's on this panel today. Everyone brings a lot of different strengths and experience to this team, and I'm happy to be here in this role. When I think about the Project Thrive effort and really what was the most significant thing that was accomplished in our 5 years, I really think about the fact that we were a demonstration site. And the idea behind a demonstration site is that you can try things and you can experiment with things and do things to see what kind of outcomes you can accomplish and achieve. And I think that all along, we really had a really optimistic view of systems change, of doing systems work, and we could make a difference. And I think that the fact that this was a demonstration project from the beginning, and that's how it was funded, it just gave us a lot of latitude to try some different things and to really bring a team together and to look at how we identify, how we support, and how we serve boys and young men of color. And it was, how could we be creative to get in there and do the work as a team and lift up victims of violence in this particular age group in South County in particular, and how could we come together and start to move the work and move thought processes that would allow for the work to be done and allow for it to be done with a trauma-informed lens, allow for us to do it considering cultural diversity, race, ethnicity, all of these things were really part of our overall view on how Project Thrive was going to get in and do the work. And so we had a really strong team. We put a team together that had great representation from the community, not only from other county agencies, but also community-based organizations. And so I think that was one of our initial accomplishments, was to put together a really cohesive team that could really work together to further this work and to start to make some change. And I want to recognize that on our team, we had CAB was part of our team. We had the County Office of Education. We worked with behavioral health, and really children's behavioral health mostly. United Way was obviously a big part of this. Probation as well. And applied survey research also played a big part in this. So those were the primary partners. We had other partners come in and really contribute to the work at different times. Watsonville Police Department was also a really big a partner of ours throughout the project. The work itself really took two paths. And I think that for me, it was exciting because if you wanted to do systems work, Project Thrive allowed for that. If you wanted to do direct services and do street outreach, we had that path as well. And so what was really unique about our project was we were trying to do this umbrella approach of systems work, how to focus on equitable outcomes, how to focus on what we were doing in the community as a community, how to take a trauma-informed lens and put that perspective on this. We did convenings that included implicit bias training, culturally responsive organization training. We had leadership cohorts that we put together to help move the work from the Project Thrive period, the 5 years we were together. We're now transitioning to the Youth Violence Prevention Network. And so kind of building in that sustainability piece to move the work. And then, of course, we had a really successful conference as one of our convenings. We had 177 people attend this. And I think about that conference was one of our really early opportunities to get out there and engage with the community and invite the community in. And I think we did a really nice job with our Trauma Informed conference that we had at the Coconut Grove. So I guess I'll kind of conclude this by saying we had so many things going on, and we had so many partners, and really it was just for me, it was very rewarding to be part of this team from the get-go. And it was rewarding in the sense that, you know, we had over 1,250 contacts with youth or young men of color, boys, in that 5-year period in our street outreach program, 1,250 contacts. And that number really stands out to me because those were opportunities to really lift up and support young men in our community that had been victims of violence. That stands out to me as a highlight. It's something that I'm not sure we would have done, and not to that level if we hadn't had this grant opportunity. So there's just so many things that I'm very proud of this team. And one of the things I really want to recognize as a takeaway for me is that the United Way really organized and coordinated these efforts, and they continue to do so in partnership with the Youth Violence Prevention Network. And I'm just so excited to see the work continue. And I really want to invite anyone watching this, listening to this, to really get involved. And we look for partnership. Actually, I thought about partnership versus collaboration. What's the difference? And Project Thrive, while we were collaborative in nature, we really focused on partnerships. And I think that's my takeaway from this, and probably what I'm most proud of is the partnerships. We couldn't do this alone. We had a lot of people come to the table, and for that I'm pretty happy about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow. There's a lot of power in collaboration and partnership that, yeah, wow, 1,200? That's a lot.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much, Rob. We'll
You're
move on to our next speaker, Maria. So Alcance is a program of Community Action Board, and it's a key project in providing direct services to youth and families. So how does CAB and Alcance ensure that services are being provided and that there is engagement with youth and families?
Thank you so much. Yes, well, the elements of CAB's cultural responsibility to our community is really, really important in this partnership. It is an essential piece to successfully engage youth and families in our programs. Our mission and our values speak highly of the work that we do, and that leads to being the service to our community and being responsive to those that we serve. Every 2 years, Community Action Board conducts an assessment, a community assessment to determine the needs of our community. And this is how Community Action Board, puts programming for youth and families. And the other piece of that is hiring staff that is being very intentional when hiring. We make sure that the staff that we are hiring are we honor culture and life experiences. The other thing is we want to make sure that we reduce barriers for families and youth. We have what is called a no wrong door policy, and this really helps us to streamline access to services. Alcance has a youth model with the youth that says, say no more. And what does that mean to a lot of us? It means, I am your personal assistant. You need something, call me. You need a ride to school, call me. You need to go to a job interview? Call me, I'll take you. So we want to make sure that the youth and the families know that this is the place where they can come for services. We have youth who have been in our program 10 years ago, and they have gone into the journey and they still come back. This is their home for them. This is where they can come and get the services that they need. We have resumes of youth who have looked for employment services 10 years ago, and we still have it on our system. They can still come and say, hey, do you still have my resume? And they feel really happy to know that we have it. So Community Action Board, we also have multi-programming services here, from rental assistance, employment, immigration services. So if there's a program or a service that our families that are accessing and we don't have it, we are able to refer them to other locations, to other programming. We have partnerships, collaborations. A lot of our grants are written in a way that with intention. We write other agencies into the grants so that we can have that partnership, so that we can support and be able to refer. And if there's a service that we don't have or we don't have it, we make the hand one referral to other agencies. And most of our programming here at Community Action Board is free of service, free of cost. Majority of our programs are free, unless either client is looking for a service and it requires an application for something, and that it's not covered through our program. Our programs are really strength-based focus, and solution focus as well. We utilize a program called the Noble when working with our youth. In this, we recognize that youth need a support system to be successful in making safe choices, increasing safe life skills, and where they can be feel proud of their cultural background identity. We offer these circles in school settings, and now with COVID in place, we're moving to doing this virtual. And more than anything, with working with these families and youth, we want to have a dialogue process, self-reflective, conversational style to build on life experiences and moving forward, and to be able to support the youth. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for your answer. Wow, the work that CAV has been doing in reducing barriers for families and students is really amazing. I really applaud you for that. So thank you so much. We will move on now to the next speaker, Martin. So the COE has had a long-standing partnership with the Youth Violence Prevention Network. And during the last 2 years, they've been working on Project Thrive. Can you share a little bit about your role with the COE as it relates to restorative practices and the overall system changes efforts of the Youth Violence Prevention Network?
Absolutely. And yes, thank you for the question. I was involved actually when the Youth Violence Prevention Partnership and Task Force started back in 2004. And it's been really a pleasure to see it transition over the past, 8 years or 6 years. And, one of the things in terms of my position at the County Office of Education is my role has been really around restorative justice and restorative practices for many years there. And although I don't directly now serve families and youth as I had in the past, I still oversee those programs. And it was really a wonderful transition over these past few years, because we have worked with probation for many years, and we've worked with Watsonville Police Department, and we receive diversion referrals for youth who are caught really committing some sort of minor misdemeanor or sort of Wobbler type felony crime. And usually what we'll do through our restorative justice lens is apply how we can holistically look at that incident and balance, personal accountability, community safety, and the holistic aspects of their impacts. And then also look at how do we enhance that young person so that they will be set up for success in the future. And for many years, our program has existed as a response when a crime has committed. But over the past, I'd say about 3 or 4 years, we've really wanted to have this opportunity to move into the schools and look at how are we not only handling school-based offenses differently through this lens of restorative justice, but also how are we looking about building a community that is embracing restorative practices. And that is then now influencing the culture of the school and how you handle and how you treat individuals and how you handle things when instances arise. And so in alternative education, which is our County Office of Education district, there was this window of time where our department transitioned to a manager who worked for alternative education. And there was this reopening of a school that had closed, which was Watsonville Community School, and now opening to Sequoia Schools. And it was this new kind of opportunity to look at how we're going to do things differently. And restorative practices and restorative justice was built into that project design, that school design. And I want to share just a real brief story. One of the first circles that I was a part of at Sequoia School, there was a young man who had nearly gotten into a fight, but they stopped. It was sort of a scuffle. And we were having a circle with the admin who had worked with this young man for many years, a couple of peers, as well as a couple of facilitators. And this young man sat over in his chair, sort of hunched over, unable to look up, kind of with his hood on. And I think about how, some administrators would say, son, you need to look up, you need to look me in the eye. And what this did was allow for him to, clearly this young person had experienced trauma, right? And to allow for him to go through this without having that level of authority kind of saying, you need to behave a certain way. And it allowed for, at one point, that he did look up though, when the administrator said, I've worked with you for over 5 years and I've seen you grow and I don't want to transfer schools. And it breaks my heart to think that I might. And she was having a place to also have her voice heard as kind of witnessing. And she says, it's scary for me when I witness these things. I have to, be in the middle of this type of an incident. And so she had her place for an opportunity to kind of, grieve and express her feelings. And then it was that moment where the young man sat up and looked and felt very impacted by her. And it was a moment of just saying, gosh, we can look at how these instances on campus can be handled differently in a way that's going to build community, strengthen relationships, and help meet people where they are. And it was really exciting because after that first year, there were very, very few, I think maybe, and I want to not say for sure, but I don't think there were any fights on that campus. And in the past at Watsonville Community School, there had been fights. And sometimes the students would say, I think we need to have a restorative circle about this. And so that's that school culture that you're shifting. And that's that different intervention of saying, A plus B does not always have to equal C. You do this, you do that, you get 20 hours of community service. No, we're looking at, maybe we're going to have tea with my teacher because we want to build a relationship because this person was stink-eyeing this person during break. And it was, it's really looking at creative ways to build community. And one of the aspects of Project Thrive was that we had also an opportunity to bring in some professional development for staff and really talk about implicit bias, to talk about race, to talk about restorative practices, to help them understand what that concept is. It's hard to shift culture. It's hard to shift mindset of some folks who've been doing things a certain way for many years. And this was allowing that opportunity for that more robust of a shift. And I guess I will end by saying, I think that with all that's happening in the world right now, right, we have a moment to say, maybe we should do things differently. Maybe we should look at how we handle school behaviors. Maybe every school can think about how they want to shift towards a more restorative approach, a more holistic approach to building community and handling challenge. So I'm really grateful that the County Office of Education was able to participate with these incredible organizations to really impact the many students that Rob mentioned, to hopefully have more just resilient and wonderful lives as a result. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I think it's also like a time for youth that they're very responsive to these restorative practices. Like I think they're ready for change, and I think they're ready for a whole different system change. So thank you so much, Martine.
Thank you.
We'll move on now to our last panelist, Jasmine. So Jasmine, from your perspective, after hearing everything that's been said and for everything that you've been doing in your work, where do we go from here? It's a big question. I'm sorry.
I have some ideas. Where do we go from here? First, I just want to say that I'm so grateful and honored to be part of this dialogue and to be part of this work. And it's been really incredible at times and really painful at over times, but we continue to come back and show up and continue that partnership, because if we don't, it's really the youth community and families that are being harmed, right, by our own barriers. And so I just wanted to say a little bit about myself, because I think that I bring a little bit of a unique perspective to the work that I do, having been born and raised in Santa Cruz County, Chicana, lifelong committed to serving the community. I'm one of those youth who was touched by the criminal justice system, affected by the criminal justice system, both myself, my family, my loved ones. And I really chose to try to open up the doors of opportunity and show youth what's on the other side of them, of those doors. I think it's our responsibility to do that for our youth, because those doors are not open to them readily. They're getting opened with our help. And so I was one of those youth that left Santa Cruz County to go get my higher, master's in social work, with the commitment to come back to Santa Cruz County to continue to work with our youth. The last about 13, 14 years, I've been working in the adult system and have partnered with Watsonville PD, with probation, with CAB for a long time. And at that point, we really were committed to supporting our partnerships. But what we did that I was really proud of, and what brought me into the Project Thrive Collaborative, was our mental health liaison program. And they're licensed clinicians that are housed in the various law enforcement jurisdictions and do ride-alongs with officers to help determine who's in a mental health crisis, and maybe it's not a criminal matter at that time. Law enforcement often gets called to those calls, but really the opportunity to have a licensed clinician who could respond to youth in crisis, to families and adults in crisis, and having that shared partnership with the jurisdictions where we each pay, behavioral health pays half of those salaries and the jurisdictions pay half of those salaries. And what brought us to that is that shared commonality, right? And that's what we all come here, because we have that shared vested interest in committing our work to the youth in this community. The youth need mentors. The youth need adults that are invested in them and that will continue to show up and support them. Now that I've moved on from the adult system and I'm back in the children's behavioral health system, I'm really excited to partner with the juvenile probation department. We do work in juvenile hall at the evening center, and we provide outpatient therapy services for youth and their families through children's behavioral health. So we really provide that clinical intervention piece, but we absolutely don't do it alone. We collaborate daily with folks like Maria and her CAB team. We collaborate daily with Rob and his staff around challenges both in juvenile hall, in the evening center. We really want to, and we've learned that collaboration and partnership, and really I like that Rob broke that down. There is a difference between collaboration and partnership, right? You can partner all day long, but that doesn't mean that you're actually collaborating and communicating and working towards making something better and different. So I really appreciate that. I also just want to say that, we've continued to do this work. Students are continuing to struggle. Families are struggling. This is in the time of COVID, in the time of racial injustice, in the time of fires. This is an unprecedented time that our community is going through. And so, I know that people feel those effects in different ways. And somebody said this before, that we're in different boats in the same water, right? So we all have different experiences. We're all in the same experience of trauma, of fires, of all this stuff, but we experience it differently depending on who we are, what our supports are, who we're connected to, right? And so I just wanted to name that, because everybody's really struggling in our community, and I just felt like we had to say that. So what I'm really, and where I see our future in this, and what I'm committed to do is, I was thinking about it, that there's the C work. There's multiple C's. So we can continue to identify our commonality and where we could come together and join and partner. We continue to collaborate. We continue to stay committed to the youth in our community and bettering our systems to meet their needs, not expecting them to change to meet our needs, right? And that we continue to be creative about alternatives, about interventions, about the work that we do collectively to provide for our ability to ride those waves depending on what the needs are of our youth and communities, right? Really the idea of the restorative practices, those are amazing processes. And I've been able to participate in that myself and have learned a lot from those. And I really think that restorative practices can be beneficial for our community, not only for youth, but even within our own families, within our own agencies and departments when we have challenges and needs to work through things. It's an amazing practice. I think that one of the things also that I'm really proud of Project Thrive for doing, it took a while to kind of figure out, like, what are we doing? And really it is that systems work where we're able to show up as leaders and have these conversations and support our own agencies and change to meet the need. But it was also that individual street outreach that CAB was so involved with, and that they would be out there and connecting with those youth on the streets, with youth that, young adults that they could identify with, right? So that need to really be intentional about the staff that we're hiring. We really need to model folks that we are serving, right? So as a youth who's needing to go to a therapist because, I've been directed to, or I want to be able to access somebody that understands me and that knows me, right? I always say finding a good therapist is kind of like finding a really good, comfortable pair of shoes. And sometimes you have to try it on a couple of times to find that right fit. And the idea of therapy can be very daunting, and, there's a lot of stigma around that. So I really want to change that perspective as well, as around we're a helping organization. We help folks. We all come together to help folks. We all are this massive puzzle, right? And we each are different puzzle pieces that need to come together and fit together really well. And I think that's our challenge, right? Is to continue to identify what are we doing really well? Let's continue to do that. What are the areas that we really need to improve on? And where are those missing pieces of the puzzle that we have to then create some sort of safety net there, right? Resources are limited. We're under major budget cuts. There's a lot of challenges that our community is facing, and yet people continue to show up every day to do the work to support our youth and families. And we need to continue to show up every day, or maybe not show up every day for these conversations, but really continue these dialogues and that commitment to have regular sessions and meetings in collaboration with leadership as we are modeling for our staff what we want them to do on their levels with each other, right? Like, I want my staff to reach out to probation, to reach out to the County Office of Ed, to reach out to CAB. These are all resources that we have, so we need to utilize them. So, I believe, and I'm confident that with this group of folks, we've learned that, collaboration and partnership can be successful. We've learned from each other what areas we might get a little reactive or triggered on, and learn how to come back and continue that conversation. We have been incredibly vulnerable with each other, and I think that that's really an important thing to model for our youth. And we've made plenty of mistakes, and we're going to continue to make mistakes. And that's part of it as well. It's a learning process, right? As adults in this work, as professionals in this work, we're lifelong learners. We've never gotten to the point where we understand it all. We're done. We continue to show up and learn and try to develop our systems to best respond to the needs of our communities, families, and youth. And that's changing all the time depending on the current crises that we're going through. So it's really hard work. But the only way to do that is really to continue the partnership and collaboration and communication and stay together for what is best for our youth and families. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much for your insightful answers, Jasmine. Wow. A lot of really good points in there. So now, I will now open it up to questions that actually our youth have come up with for all of you. So I will open it up to all of you. If no one answers, I will call on you. So somebody please answer. The first question is, how is your organization supporting youth in leadership efforts?
Well, I'll go ahead and start. I think our organization at the probation department, we have a number of different ways that I believe we're supporting youth in different opportunities to increase their capacities in a number of ways. And leadership, we're considering right now working with the United Way and other partners to look at kind of youth led council, like a leadership council for youth. And there's different initiatives and different councils that are currently in place in the county. And one of the things we're trying to do is really try to figure out how do we align those efforts and really focus on creating one big council or creating councils that are related to one another so that they support each other and it's not a duplication of this or that it's really aligned to provide the youth a voice. And I think probation does a series of focus groups. We've done those in a number of things, and we do that because you have to have the youth voice. They need to have a say in what we're doing and give us the space and give us the information to allow us to make more informed decisions about how we work with youth and families. And so I see their involvement, and it was this way with Project Thrive, and it'll continue to be this way with Youth Violence Prevention Network, is the youth have to be represented, and they have to have a strong voice for us to be as effective as we can be.
I think that on behalf of Children's Behavioral Health, we really do that deep clinical work with youth and their families. And we try to support them in creating stability and really identifying their needs and working with them on their own goals that they've chosen, right? Obviously, as adults, we want to grow and strengthen our youth into leaders. And I think that that's always part of this development. But really, we focus on the goals that are identified that youth want to work towards. And one of the things that our staff does do, though, is that they really look for opportunities for our youth to engage in various areas of youth leadership. I know, for example, we have youth that are really involved in and participate in the Queer Youth Leadership Awards, right? And we have our staff that work with some of our clients to really help them show up and engage. And so we do have staff that work with, because we work with a broad range of youth, anywhere from the age of 3 up to the age of 20. And so we also have to take that developmental approach of what is appropriate based on their developmental level, right? And what their individual needs are. But definitely as our youth are getting older and starting to age out of the system, we are really trying to get them prepared to really have them move on to a warm handoff in another area if they need to continue services, and really try to get them engaged with job opportunities and leadership opportunities, and really share information and resources so that they can make those decisions for themselves of what they really want to engage
in. Go ahead, Marie.
Okay.
So, sorry, I know we could have more of a deeper discussion on this question, but we do have 2 more questions, and I want to get it in before we run out of time. So I don't know if you want to answer the next one, but it's how can leaders create more space for youth when making decisions that impact them?
I can share a little bit about Community Action Board Alcance program. I think for our programming here at Alcance, all of our programs are youth-led. So our youth have a voice, and we try to empower them with what the decisions and the goals for the futures are. We don't do services based on what Community Action Board has for them in mind, but more it's what do you want? What do you want to do in life? What are your interests? So for us, that is leadership and that is empowerment, giving them the voice. A lot of the youth that are in our program are youth at risk, youth who have been impacted by trauma. And it is really important for us to be able to give them that opportunity and engage them in higher education, engage them in employment services, and being peer mentors of other youth, especially when they're participating in Joven Noble circles.
And maybe I'll just briefly add that I think, part of what leaders need to do is to listen and really listen to the youth voices, to not token kind of have the youth sort of token voice, but to authentically engage our youth and to listen and to integrate our decision making based on their input. And I know it's almost easy. It's easier said than done. Another bit I'd add is, as leaders, especially through kind of the lens of kind of government or high admin, we sometimes, expect people to come to us, and we need to revisit how we do our engagement, because there's certain folks who feel comfortable coming to their leaders and there's a whole bunch more who don't. So how are we going to the communities that we want to hear from? How are we building those relationships, and how are we authentically listening to them to integrate their voice into the decisions that we're making about them? And I think youth, it's harder for youth because I think they get caught with sort of that parent-like approach, right? Like, we know what's best for you. And so we have to put that aside as adults and as leaders, and design our policies and our programs based authentically on their input. And it takes work and relationships, and it has to be the direction that we move in. So that would be sort of my brief summary of that.
Okay. Thank you both for your answers. The last question we have, I will actually direct to Jorge, because I haven't spoken yet. But Jorge, do you have any words of wisdom for young leaders who are entering work, like the workforce? Oh, your mic is off.
Yeah, that's better. So anyway, wisdom. I don't know if I can offer wisdom, but I can certainly offer my experience, right? I would say, Martin just said something really important is adults need to listen, right? So don't forget to listen to what's going on in people's lives. And don't forget to listen to yourself and what's going on in your life. And I think it's important to realize that someone's always watching what we're doing, what you're doing, professionally and personally. You're going to be applying for a job as a young leader. Understand that organizations will look at your Facebook, your Instagram, your Twitter, your Snapchat, whatever platform you're on. People will look at that stuff, and they'll see, what it is that you value. So be cautious of that. And then, it's important for young leaders, or anybody really, to have the courage to have, a proper engagement in truth, right? And not to allow people to tell you what to think, but learn how to think for yourself. Educate yourself. Education is the golden door. Gosh, when I came to the police department, I was 15 and a half, and I was a Paisa kid from down the street, and it was people who believed in me, and they didn't necessarily look like me, right? I had Mr. Wong at the at Watsonville High, Betsy Schwartz at EA Hall, who were nothing like me but cared about me. And people need to, people going into the workforce, you need to really engage people for who they are, not for who they appear to be. Martine talked about that one youth who was, just hiding. There was trauma there. It's important for us to see, what's going on underneath the floorboards of someone's life. And then also ask yourself, who do you admire? Because I think the reason why I ask that is because I think that, the instinct for admiration is also the instinct for imitation. So whoever it is that you admire, you're going to imitate. So find a mentor, whoever it is, and follow that path, because it's easy to fall, to victimhood and pick up the weight of your suffering and move uphill, because you will get there. And again, and don't be too agreeable also, be precise in your language and echen las ganas, give it all you got. So that's kind of all I have.
Jorge, I want to jump in on that. I absolutely agree with the idea of mentorship. And, that's what we all as adults can continue to offer our young folks, right? Like we come here and do this, but we can also be open to be mentors to youth who are interested in our fields, who look up to us, right? Or maybe even just youth who are interested in the types of positions that we hold and want to know more about that. For me personally, I had a couple of BS who had gone to college, who knew kind of what to do. And so while my high school counselor was telling me, don't bother applying to college, you're not going to make it, just go to Cabrillo and take some typing lessons. My BS were like, no. Your job is to never tell a student not to shoot for the stars and to show them how to do that. And so when my aunts helped me apply to college and I got accepted to UCSC, they marched me back down to my counselor's office and threw that acceptance letter on his desk and was just like, don't ever do that to anybody, right? And I'm way more privileged than a lot of my friends were in high school, and I had way more supports. And I had that mentorship, and not just from individuals in my family, but individuals in the community that I looked up to, that I took that risk to call them, to reach out to them and say, I want to learn from you. I want to be like you. I want to understand how you got to where you're at. And they took me under their wing and they supported me. But they wouldn't have never known who I was if I wouldn't have outreached them, right? So we can show up by having open doors and being willing to put that hand out and support youth and help them show the ways and mentor them. And we need youth to also speak up and use their voice and really advocate for themselves, because people won't hear you if you don't use your voice.
I wanted to also share a little bit. I will probably what I tell the youth here at Alcance is there's no limits. The sky is the limit. There's, reach out for your dreams. Search your heart, see what you like to do, and also reach out and do some research as well. And volunteer hours really help you to understand if that is the area of work that you want to go into. And also, I also do a call to a lot of the service providers and law enforcement to open the doors for this youth, and to bring them in, give them internships, paid internships or volunteer hours so they can get credit. I think that we need to change our ways, the way we see things. A lot of times we want to get free work from the youth, but it would be great if our systems were to better plan the way to bring in youth into the our programs and offer those paid internships so they can be invested and be able to gain more and have a place, a safe space for them to be. So I would probably say and also stay in school. If you don't know how to move on to higher education, reach out, come to Community Action Board. Our staff will be here to support you and guide you and walk you to cover your college or take you to a higher 4-year college to go and research and see how you can put in an application. So there's no limits. So, come to Alcance or any other program, but do your research.
Yeah, and I would just add to that as well that when I think about the systems work and I think about the partners that are on this panel and have spent this time together with Project Thrive and the Youth Violence Prevention Network, I think about how things have shifted with youth in the community and how our approaches have shifted, and they will continue to shift. And one of the things that we talk about as a team is we talk about focusing more on the positive things and spending some time figuring out what resonates with the youth and where are their strengths, and then what can we do to lift that up even further. Because I think that what happens is once you find something that's super positive with any person and you start to really, really lift that up and support that and get them even more engaged in what it is that's working, what's positive, I think it pulls up everything else that's going on around them. They have self-esteem, they have confidence, they have the ability to do something because they're having a lot of success, however that's measured, in one particular area. I think it pulls up all the other areas too. And it makes them want to continue to feel that way and have that success. And so one of the things we talk about at probation, it's not really my advice to the youth. It's my advice to our staff at probation is find that positive thing. Let's stop talking about what the youth didn't do or what the youth may not be doing well or what the challenges. Let's talk about, we need to talk about what are the barriers to success or being able to achieve whatever outcomes they want. We need to talk about that and advocate for them. But let's really lift up those positive things and let's make them even bigger and more positive and find a place to let someone just expand those opportunities. And I think that that's a shift we really as adults in this system, we need to focus more on positives and lifting up the youth.
And I'll just end by saying I completely agree with that. And we have to remind our youth that if they visualize it and the power of their thoughts, they have so much potential, and it has to focus on what they can accomplish and what they want to accomplish based on their drive and their passion. And I think right now in this moment, they have an opportunity to transform systems in ways that we've never seen before. So the sky's the limit, and innovation is huge. And we have a generation of youth who know about environmentalism and climate change, and they want to make differences in ways they know how that I can't even think about. And it's so far beyond me with the social media tools and just the things that they can do to not lose sight of what their power is. And we're depending on that. So I'm really hopeful and invite the youth to just to come forward with all of their innovation and passion.
Thank you so much for all of your very deep and very filled answers. I've learned so much from all of you through this dialogue today. So thank you so much for participating. We sadly have to wrap up. And thank you so much for just your commitment to this task force and for everything you've done for the network. I've heard so much today about collaboration, commonality, being culturally responsive, being there, bringing the youth there, inspiring. I've just learned so much from all of you just in this short conversation. So thank you so much. And with that, I will pass it on to Daniel and Chloe to continue the event. Thank you.
Thank you to the Fireside Chat panelists for sharing the milestones and lessons learned from over the past 5 years. The work you have all done is pivotal in paving the path for youth leaders to continue this work. And thank you for answering the questions posed from our youth panelists. If you would like to learn more Project Thrive's work, please check out the links listed in our event program.
We are very excited about our upcoming keynote speaker. Dr. Sean Ginwright is one of the nation's leading innovators, provocateurs, and thought leaders on African American youth activism, and youth development. He is professor of education in the Africana Studies Department and a senior research associate at San Francisco State University. His research examines the ways in which youth in urban communities navigate through the constraints of poverty and struggle to create equality and justice in their schools and communities. Dr. Ginwright is founder and chief executive officer of Flourish Agenda Incorporated, a national nonprofit consulting firm whose mission is to design strategies that unlock the power of healing and engage youth of color and adult allies in transforming their schools and communities.
Hello, my name is Dr. Sean Ginwright, and I am so excited to be with you today and share with you some ideas about youth engagement and youth participation. I want to say thank you for the invitation to United Way of Santa Cruz Violence Prevention Network and all the stakeholders and all the folks that are involved with that network. You're doing such important work, particularly in this time. We know we're living in some very unusual times. There's so much happening in society, and the work that you're doing in the Violence Prevention Network is so critically important to transforming our society into the kind of spaces and places where young people's voices are heard, and that there's different policies and practices that have a possibility of transforming our cities and our communities. We are living right now in very difficult times. We know that we are living directly in between trauma and transformation. Trauma on one hand, we know that the COVID virus has had a significant impact on young people's lives around this country. We know that particularly young people of color and communities of color have been disproportionately impacted by exposure to the COVID virus. And we also recognize that that police violence in our communities and the dehumanization of peoples of color are continuously having a negative impact on the health and well-being of our communities. As we experience trauma, we also have the possibility of transformation. And we know that what's happening in our society right now, that there are groups of people from around the world that are calling for the humanity to recognize the lives of Black communities and brown communities. And that as we work together, that there is a possibility that we will have opportunities to finally transform the systems that have been harming groups of people, to transform those systems into systems of hope and healing and well-being. But first, we need to understand the context of when we talk about trauma. So when we talk about trauma, we first have to understand that we have been sometimes given the term post-traumatic stress disorder. And while post-traumatic stress disorder is an important way to think about trauma, the term post-traumatic stress disorder was a term that was designed for soldiers who were coming out of war that displayed behavioral problems when they came back into a normalized society. And while post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is an important concept, it falls short of describing the kinds of trauma that our young people experience every day. So when we talk about the context of trauma, we have to shift from thinking about trauma as individual acts that happen occasionally to people to thinking about trauma as a social determinants of well-being and health. When we talk about social determinants, we have to look at the laws and the policies that actually create harm that exist in our environments. And so we use the term persistent traumatic stress environment. And persistent traumatic stress environment more accurately describes the ways in which trauma is a result of laws and policies and practices that are embedded in our institutions that reproduce harm for young people and for the adult allies. Poor housing, poor medical care, poverty, and ongoing physical violence, emotional violence that happen in homes and schools and neighborhoods take their toll on young people. And our institutions need to be prepared not only to just support young people with coping on those exposures, but completely healing from them. Persistent traumatic stress environment produces what one researcher, his name is James Gabarino, and the citation is in a book called Raising Children in a Socially Toxic Environment, written in 1997. James Gabarino says that just like there are physical toxins, you can think about physical toxins in your home or your work, and if you are exposed to those physical toxins over time, those physical toxins can make you sick. James Gabarino says that just like there are physical toxins, that there are social toxins. And those social toxins have the same impact on our well-being. Social toxins are things like fear, anxiety, stress, uncertainty, shame. These things are just as present in our environment as physical toxins, but oftentimes they go undiagnosed in our institutions. And as a result, we have usually one tool to deal with young people's exposure to social toxicity. Now, I know I'm not supposed to do this, but I'm just feeling y'all. So I'm gonna go a little bit off cuff. I wanna say that these social toxins don't just affect young people, y'all. They affect us as well. That the adults who support young people also are deeply influenced by these forms of trauma. Imagine how you felt when you saw what happened to Mr. Floyd. Everyone who witnessed that experienced some form of trauma. And as a result of our collective experience of trauma, we need institutions, schools, juvenile probation departments to be able to support young people and their adult allies with transforming their exposure into healing. here's a model that I think helps us to understand how social toxicity has an influence on adults and young people, our relationships, as well as the institutions we're in. So when we talk about social toxicity are like rain clouds. And those rain clouds have a toxic impact at the individual level. They give us fear and anxiety and uncertainty. And those socially toxic rain clouds also have an influence on our relationships and the teams who we work with, the relationships we have with other people. But those socially toxic clouds also have a toxic impact on the very institutions that produce values. Those institutions produce practices and policies that are toxic to our adults and young people. Then the institution itself produces its own toxic rain cloud and it goes back out into society. Now, those toxic rain clouds don't come from anywhere. Those toxic rain clouds are the result of racism, classism, transphobia, heterosexism, and all the structural inequality and mindsets and social challenges that have a toxic impact on all our capacity to be more fully human. So in order for us to talk about healing, we have to come up with a new way to deal with our exposure to social toxicity at the individual level, at the interpersonal level, as well as the institutional level. We cannot transform or change institutions only by changing the policies of that institution. We have to change the relationships and we have to also change our individual mindsets. And so when we talk about healing-centered engagement, it builds upon trauma-informed care. And it builds upon trauma-informed care in the following ways. The first thing, it acknowledges how trauma is experienced collectively, not just individually. As I shared with you, all of us experienced some form of trauma when we saw what happened with Mr. Floyd. But you can go to any city in this country, whether it's East Oakland, whether it's the Bronx or West Philadelphia or Detroit, no matter where you're from, you could talk to young people of color. They're going to have a similar experience with police, with their schools, and sometimes even with adults that are in their environment. There's a collective experience with trauma. And if it's collective, then we also have to have collective response. The second is that when we talk and think about trauma, we have to think of it, move from a medical model of thinking about trauma as only a form of treatment to individuals who've experienced some form of disruption, and think and understand that trauma exists in the environment as a result of laws and policies that have an impact on everyone in that environment, not just the individual. That means that we cannot assume that just one person or one young person has experienced trauma. We have to assume that everybody's experienced some form of trauma. Because if we think about only focusing on individuals, we're thinking and using a medical model approach as opposed to a collective approach. The third distinction, this third distinction is that we have to focus on the restoration and healing rather than coping with symptoms. And when we talk about coping with symptoms, oftentimes we are trained, as I am trained as a sociologist and a youth development professional, my goal and my work with young people has been so much focused on getting young people to reduce symptomology, like reduction of anger, reduction of anxiety, reduction of depression. And while that's important, young people never fully heal from their exposure to ongoing trauma. And so as a result of that, we have to think about wellness and well-being as the ultimate goal of our engagement with young people. Some of the research by Isaac Prelatinsky at the University of Miami suggests that when we engage young people in a sense of agency, when they can understand the issues that are in their community, that facilitates a sense of power and control over their environment, which cultivates well-being. And so the third distinction is that we have to focus on the restoration and healing rather than only coping with symptomology. And lastly, and most importantly, that healing-centered engagement focuses on the restoration of the adult allies that support young people. It assumes that oftentimes, again, as I was trained as a youth development professional and as a researcher and professor, I was trained that as the adult, that my role is to provide the kind of supports that young people need so that they could become healthy, full adults. But I know that I still got issues as an adult, that I still have concerns and worries as an adult. I know that my work in East Oakland and San Francisco and in parts of New York and in Philadelphia, when I go and work there, that has an impact on me as well. And so the fourth and important part of our healing-centered engagement is that it focuses on the provider. It focuses on your well-being, because we understand that in order for young people to be well, their adult allies have to be well as well, right? They have to be well in that process. We call that a parallel process of well-being. That means it's not a one-way street where the adult provides the recipe, the medicine for healing, but it means that the adult is engaged in his or her own healing process as well. It means that we ask questions about our own insecurities. It means that we examine our own racial bias. It means that we get underneath our own gendered perceptions. It means that we begin to uncover those things that prevent us from being more human with one another and with the young people that we want to support. So how do we integrate healing-centered engagement? What does that look like? Let's first provide a definition of what I mean by healing-centered engagement. So when I say healing-centered engagement is three things. One, it's a perspective on how to work with young people. Second, it's an approach that allows us to change and transform our systems and supports that support the ecosystem where young people work, live, and play. And third, it is a strategy, meaning that we change the strategy of what we're trying to achieve with young people and our engagement with them in our classrooms, in our juvenile probation systems, in our social work systems. This healing-centered engagement is a strength-based approach, and it focuses on advancing a holistic way of thinking about healing and well-being, and it centers culture, race, and identity at the center of our well-being. Because oftentimes it is aspects of our identities that are harmed as a result of who we are. If you're an African-American young person, there's oftentimes transgressions with the police. If you're gay, lesbian, or transgendered, that's part of your identity. There are oftentimes harm as a result of being transgendered, gay, lesbian in our communities. If you're Latino or Asian or poor or white, right, and poor and white, that these are parts of our identities that oftentimes are harmed in our society. And so the last part, when we talk about healing-centered engagement, it means that we place these things, those things that have harmed us, parts of us that have been harmed, at the center of our engagement with young people, not at the periphery. So I've talked a lot, right? So how do we do it? How do we actually begin to think about engaging and moving in healing-centered engagement in our work? The first thing I want to say about how we do it is, as Bankole mentioned earlier, is that we have to cultivate a sense of curiosity. Oftentimes in our institutions, we are given a step-by-step recipe, right? Here's a curriculum, go do it. That transforms our young people. And healing-centered engagement doesn't work that way. While we do have a curriculum and while we do have steps, it is about transformation of who we are and how we show up, supported by the systems and supports in our institutions that allow us to have an impact. And so it is a mindset shift in how we engage in young people. And that happens at three levels. So there are principles that we use to actually create those shifts that are necessary in our work. And these principles are critically important as we think about how we provide supports to young people in our systems and institutions. The first is working with individual bias and assumptions about other groups of people, and how we actually get underneath and heal from our own bias. But we also have to heal from things that happen to us. Sometimes our engagement and work with young people, how we perceive young people, is the result of our own trauma, our own upbringing. And so we actually have to think about how we actually come to support young people. The second is our relationships, right, with interpersonal, and that's the teams that we're in, that is who we work with, that's how we relate to one another, right? So we think about the how our teams and our interpersonal relationships have an impact on young people. And then, of course, third is the policies and practices of the institution. Now, again, we have to change at all three levels in order to create healing-centered systems. And here's how we do that. So the second principle is that we use 5 points of information and engagement we call karma. And so karma stands for culture, agency, relationships, meaning, and aspirations. So we have a little, let's go to the first slide of culture. So culture means that we are developing an awareness of our own and others' racial and other social identities. It means that we're actively engaged in conversation about identity. It means that we're sharing experiences about the ways we've been harmed from aspects of our identity. And that means we're thinking about integrating and identifying culturally appropriate responses and supports to young people based on their identity. It means we have conversations about who we are and why it matters. The second principle is called agency. And agency is critically important. Agency is the individual and collective capacity to act and create change that addresses the root and personal challenges in our community. It means that we're thinking about, we're providing young people with supports around understanding the root causes of challenges in their schools and communities. We're providing civic education, but we're looking at how young people are responding to the issues that create their harm. I want you to remember the video that we showed as an opening with Hala and soon to be Dr. Corey Green's work. This is an example of agency for young men and women who've experienced significant amounts of trauma. On their own, created their own work to heal from their exposure to trauma. That is an act of agency. And as they are creating and working through Hala, that act in and of itself provides a sense of well-being. Now, agency is based in years of research, most notably the research at the University of Miami by Isaac Prelatinsky, who's engaged in years of research about the relationship between agency and well-being. And Isaac Prelatinsky suggests to us that when we are engaging in responding to those things that cause harm to us, that act of responding and engaging provides a sense of control and well-being in our lives. And so agency is an important part of how we think about the healing process. The next is relationships, right? And relationships are critical. And we know from our own work, 30-something years in working, blood, sweat, and tears with young people in their schools, in their neighborhoods, in their homes, and in the institutions, that relationships matter the most. Relationships matter the most. And unfortunately, there are ways that we have been taught about relationships that prevent healing. There are two kinds of relationships. They're transactional relationships and they're transformative relationships. In my own training as a youth development professional, as a researcher, as an executive director, and as a sociologist, my own training only trained me how to have transactional relationships with young people. And likely your training did the same. And transactional relationships are important. They're sufficient, they're necessary to have transactional relationships. And transactional relationships are those kind of relationships that are a function of our titles. If I am the executive director, you are the employee. If I'm the probation officer, you are the youth. And those are necessary and sufficient. but they don't oftentimes get us to healing. So we need to begin to cultivate, move from only transactional relationships, and then also bring forth transformative relationships. And those transformative relationships are based in vulnerability and empathy and connection. Transformative relationships are those kind of relationships that are a function of our humanity. If you know, for example, if you have transformative relationships, think about people that you're really close to. Your best friend, your spouse, maybe even some young people that you're working with. It's likely that that relationship that you've cultivated with them is based on something transformative. They've shared something personal with you, you've shared something with them, and in that exchange of empathy, you've created a transformative relationship. Now I know there's systems, and there's rules, there's boundaries that are a result of our titles, and I understand that we have to recognize and respect our professional roles and titles and boundaries in our engagement with young people. But it's also time that we re-examine them. And in order to create the kind of relationships that are necessary for healing, we need to begin to think about what might transformative relationships look like in my social work, in my criminal justice system, in my engagement with young people as a youth development professional. The next is meaning. And meaning is an important part of our transformative process. Meaning means that we're thinking about who we are in our work, where we're going, and the purpose we were born to serve. It means that we remind ourselves why we got into this work in the first place. We didn't oftentimes get into work to serve young people to make $1 million, y'all. We got into work to actually make a difference. But sometimes the grind, the bureaucracy, the paperwork, the reports, the budgets, all of that stuff gets in the way of our, and it allows us to forget why we are actually engaged in this work. And so this principle of meaning means that we integrate into our practice, in our staff meetings, in our conversations with young people, ways that we begin to think about why it's important that we get into this work. One way we think about meaning is we try to focus on the assets that young people bring rather than the liabilities. It means that if a young person has committed a crime, a young person may have broken the law, but that young person might also be love reading, or that young person also may really have a desire to start his or her own business. It means that we think about the assets that our young people are bringing, and that those assets give us more fruitful meaning in our work. And then lastly, when the last principle is around aspirations. And aspirations is important. It's important because oftentimes, and I know I'm guilty of this in my initial training, is that we're focused on solving problems. That much of our thinking, our engagement is finding young people housing, getting young people jobs, getting them not to recommit and recidivate, getting them out of trauma and violence. And that's important. But aspirations means that we also focus on their goals, their hopes, and their dreams. The research suggests that when we are able to focus on aspirations, that sense of future goal orientation provides young people a sense of well-being, purpose, and direction. We also have to cultivate aspirations among ourselves as adult allies. And aspirations are a series of conversations and practices that allow us to not just focus on problem solving, while it's important, but we also have to focus on possibility creating, focusing on what young people want, their assets, and who they want to become. And so these principles of what we call karma, culture, agency, relationships, meaning, and aspirations are critically important. I'm going to quickly go through some implementation that we want to think about. And while we won't have time to do a deep dive in implementation, it is important that we think about some steps to creating healing-centered practices in your work. So you see on one side of the pyramid is individual, interpersonal, and institutional practices. That means that we include these parts of our journey to healing-centered engagement with cultivating practices as youth workers and practitioners at the individual level. It means that we focus on activities and conversations and building our teams. And it also means that we focus on thinking about the institutional policies and practices. So on the other side, of the pyramid, there's some steps. The first step is, how do we think about our own healing? Let me give you a quick example. In my own work, in our work here at Flourish Agenda, we give our employees an opportunity to take wellness days. Those wellness days allow them to engage in individual practices. We also begin every meeting with a social emotional check-in, because we think it's important that every employee has an opportunity to talk about and express how they're feeling. That's just an individual practice. We also think it's important to establish a cohort of practitioners. We're not suggesting that you transform the entire system of 15,000 workers overnight, but bring together a group of 5 to 10 stakeholders in your institution. That could be practitioners, that could be management level, it could be the young people themselves, but a group of stakeholders. We call them a cohort of transformative practitioners. And those cohort of practitioners begin to think about healing-centered practices from their perspective in the institution. Young people have a way of thinking about healing-centered engagement. Adults have a way of thinking about healing-centered, practitioners, adult practitioners, as well as management. And then you begin to build those relationships that we talked about. We provide you with some guidance about the strategies of how you do team building, about how you actually begin to change your case, what you say in a case management meeting, how you begin to engage adults, parents and caregivers in that process. And then as we move to the institutional level, we begin to take an inventory of the policies and practices that either create harm or create healing. The laws and policies that we have, sometimes we are unaware of how they hurt or harm young people. It could be something as simple as, if an adjudicated young person who's incarcerated may be able to see their parents once or twice a week, but they have to see them behind 4-inch glass. Well, the intent might be to support that young person by seeing their caregiver twice a week, but to see them behind 4-inch glass sends another message. And so it simply means that we look at our policies and practices and try to get underneath how those policies and practices hurt or harm young people. Then once we are able to develop some policies and practices that advance a healing-centered strategy, then we pilot and test those, and then of course develop some type of progress towards healing. We actually develop metrics in our institutions. What perception do young people feel safe? How can young people and adults measure their relationships? How much trust exists in this institution, right? So we can begin to develop metrics of healing and then begin to track our progress at the individual, interpersonal and institutional level towards well-being. I want to end by saying, as I began, that we are in a place of trauma and transformation. And each one of us has a role to play, whether we like it or not. We will eventually be in a post-COVID world. We have all of us have a choice to make about whether we want to engage with young people that keep us in a world and an environment of trauma, or really embrace healing-centered practices that move our work and our institutions towards healing-centered engagement.
So I want to take some time right now to just answer a couple of questions and respond to some questions that you might have about any of the concepts or ideas or any of the material that I covered. Just want to say thank you again for the opportunity to share these ideas with you. And hopefully that there's something that I shared that may have an impact on the way that you really create profound youth-adult partnerships. A couple questions. The first question is, what are some examples of leaders creating space for youth at the decision-making table, and how has that impacted youth and adults? Really one really good example of that right now is I sit on the board of directors of a large foundation here in California. And what we recognized early on is that our decision-making, even though we invest in youth, we provide resources and grant-making for young people in organizations. We realized early on that young people bring issues to the foundation that we weren't thinking about. And so we're in the process right now of actually trying to work and design a way for young people to have decision-making in the boardroom, to actually be part of our board of directors. It's not easy. There's a lot of different requirements and so forth that we have to think about. But most importantly is that we're really thinking seriously about how to form and create spaces for young people to have greater voice, decision-making, and power in the boardroom. And so a couple of things that we're doing to actually make that happen. The first thing we're doing is we are talking to young people about their interest in being and having power at the table in our boardroom. And so we formed a small learning community of young people, and together, a group of about 10 young people and a subset of our board of directors, about 5 or 6 of us, are working collaboratively to redesign our board meetings. Our board meetings are during the week. The board meetings are sometimes go all day, and we don't want young people to miss school and so forth. So we're working together right now to really try to figure out how we can create the kind of a board of directors where young people can actually sit and be at the table. And as I said, it's not easy. There's certain things that it requires for adults. The adults, we have to actually have more training about what it means to create partnerships with young people. So we're going through training. We are doing our own learning journey about what it means to have meaningful relationships and have young people at the decision-making table. I think more what this means in terms of, how does these sort of collaborative power sharing impact young people and adults? I think a couple of things. I think for young people, of course, young people bring issues that adults are not thinking about. Oftentimes, we are just not clued in to the kinds of issues that are important to young people that have an impact on the quality of their life or the quality of their school day. And so when adults have that partnership, we have a much more nuanced understanding of the issues that young people are dealing with. And it allows for us to work together to really come up with solutions to address those issues. So I provided one example. There's another example in Tucson, Arizona, the social justice youth development social justice partnership at the University of Arizona, where young people were demanding that they wanted ethnic studies in their schools. And they were working with teachers who were trying to encourage and support young people to get ethnic studies in their schools. This happened in I think it was 2016 and 2017, where the Tucson Unified School District finally had a hearing for, it was about 50 or 60 young people who had been organizing for over a year to get ethnic studies in their schools. Now, unfortunately, that issue, it sort of blew up. It got to the state level. The governor actually didn't want that to happen. But the beautiful thing that occurred, even though that there was controversy over the ethnic studies program, those young people came together and began to form their own sort of relationships and partnerships that went into other nonprofit organizations. And they learned from that experience that their voice matters, and that when they bring their issues to decision-making tables, that they can have a significant impact. So those are just two examples that I hope spark your interest. One is with the foundation that I sit on. We're trying to, as I said, create a pathway to bring young people onto the board of directors. And the second is in Tucson, the Tucson Unified School District, and its effort to engage young people in bringing in ethnic studies, which was an organizing, a year-long organizing campaign that took place in Tucson. So those are two examples. The second question is, what are some of the lessons from my experience in creating youth adult spaces? I think the most valuable lesson that I've learned is that that adults have to do their work, right? And that is, we can't assume that just because you are an adult that you understand how to work with young people. It requires training, requires time, and it requires patience. And so the most important lesson that I've learned is I've seen two things happen. One, that because adults believe in youth-adult partnerships, one of two things happen. One, sometimes adults feel that they abdicate their role as adults in preparing and supporting young people. And they bring young people into situations where they're not prepared because they believe that young people should be making decisions. And so sometimes young adults pull back too far, and young people are put in tokenized situations, or they're put in situations where they're actually not able to provide the kind of value because they haven't been prepared. So the first thing is I see adults pull back too much. On the other hand, I've seen adults be too closely engaged, right? That is, that adults expect decisions and processes to work just like for young people, it's the same way they work with adults. And so, for example, in some partnerships that I've been in that work really well, young people bring icebreakers into meetings. Young people bring in social media and videos and things into a meeting that wouldn't necessarily happen in an adult meeting. And so, two things that I've seen with adults is, one, adults pull too far back and just say, "You'll go, young people." And the second is that they're too close, right? That they think that young people should have the same approach, thinking, and processes as adults, right? And so there is a sweet spot, but that sweet spot requires time and it requires practice and some training, right? And so that adults actually have a better understanding of what a meaningful partnership would look like. One of the places where I've seen that work is in some of my own work with young people, where we every year we have designed a summer camp for African American young people in the San Francisco Bay Area, and every year we create an opportunity for young people to provide feedback and to actually create parts of that summer camp that they want to see. It's not just that we get feedback from them, but we might say, okay, young people, we've trained you to do leadership development, or we've trained you how to think about racial and ethnic identity. Now go and you have a 2-hour block to design an activity or a workshop for your peers around identity development. Or you can design the entire day that you think is best meets the needs for young people. So when I see those kinds of spaces where there's young people and adults working collaboratively together, as well as adults really reflecting and understanding their role, not to be too far back nor too close, is where I've really seen really powerful youth-adult partnership work. So the third question is, what words of wisdom do I have for young leaders who are just entering the work? And I would say, I'd say a couple of things. One, that to have some patience, right? That young people understand that the issues that you're bringing to your decision-making tables where there are adults are urgent, and that things need to be responded to very quickly, and there needs to be greater sense of urgency. So I would say for young leaders, don't lose that, man. Don't lose your sense of urgency. Don't lose your sense of the seriousness of what needs to happen, but also understand that things sometimes take time, right? And so there is this sort of balance that I think is important. My experience is that working with young people, that the issues are always urgent, and for adults they take so much time. And I think that working together and listening to each other, young people making adults work more urgently, and adults supporting young people as they be a little bit more patient, as they understand the nuances and complexities of change in some systems, right? So I think that both of those things are important. And for young leaders, don't lose your sense of urgency. We need it now more than ever. As I said earlier, we are in a society that sits between trauma and transformation, and that your experience and that your wisdom, that your brilliance can really, really provide an opportunity for our society to transform. And so those are some quick thoughts I have about a youth adult partnership that I just really want to encourage you to think about coming together and first learning from each other. This is the last point that I want to make, is that sometimes we engage in these transactional relationships. And I would say that if you're going to form a youth adult partnership, spend some time together, get to know each other's stories, get to know where each other came from, get to know each other's backgrounds. As I said earlier in the first question, we're spending 6 months, just getting to know each other before we get into the hard task of all the planning and scheduling. But spend some time getting to know each other, getting to know how you work together. When you get to know each other, the adults get to know the young people get to know the adults. That matters when you begin to really build the kind of strong relationships that are important. One of the things that I've seen work well is sort of buddies, right? So on our board, on the work that I do, I'll be paired with a young person and we'll just check in once a month, have a 45-minute hour conversation just to check in. They ask me questions and I ask them questions. And we just get to know each other. And each board member or each adult that's on the committee will have one or two young people that they're checking in with. And that allows for some organic relationship building to happen so that when you're engaged in trying to build spaces for joint decision making and young people making decisions, that those relationships matter. So I hope this is an opportunity, that these questions got you thinking, got you curious about how to form these partnerships. But I want to again say thank you and look forward to hearing what you create. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you to Dr. Sean Wright for providing a truly inspiring keynote address, and knowledge and expertise is valuable as we move forward in supporting youth and youth-led efforts. We also appreciate you answering questions posed from our youth panelists. We will now have a lunch break. When we come back, we will have our youth panel and unveil the next phase of our work.
Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed this first part of the event. Thank you again to Dr. Sean Ginwright, the Fireside Chat panelists.
We are now going to have an amazing opportunity to listen to youth and how they reimagine a resilient Santa Cruz County with equity and leadership at the forefront. Before we hear from them, we would like the audience to be ready to listen with an open heart. Their experiences are not to be up for debate. Be open to any discomfort you feel. Don't take things personally. Listen for their emotional impact from their experiences and stories. Be fully present. Set aside your phone and close any open applications on your computer and devices. Thank you. Berenice will also be facilitating the youth panel. To learn more about the youth panelists, please check out the event program.
Thank you, Daniel, for that introduction. And thank you all, everyone, for joining us today and for being a part of this event today. Today, we have a wonderful group of youth panelists joining us today, and they're going to share their vision of how they reimagine a more resilient Santa Cruz County. And we're going to hear more about what they think is needed for youth to thrive, learn, and succeed in this county. And we acknowledge that we are collectively experiencing unprecedented times with COVID-19, with the racial justice revolution, and with wildfires. At this time, more than ever, we now need youth to step up and to speak up and to share their voice and to share what they think is needed in our community. And while we don't have all the answers, our youth panelists are going to be speaking on some issues and are going to be sharing their thoughts and starting conversations that are very much needed here in this county. And I'm so excited to be part of this. I'm so excited to introduce these youth. Today we have Chloe from Santa Clara University. She's a Santa Cruz High alumni and founder and director of the Black Youth Empowerment Workshops joining us. We also have Kalia, Harbor High student and County Office of Education and United Ways intern. We have Isaac from Aptos High School, and he's also a part of the Aptos Community Youth Program. And we also have written responses from 2 students from Watsonville High School. They were unfortunately unable to attend this event, but we will be reading their responses to these answers. We have Osvaldo and Miguel, and they are from Jóvenes Sanos, which is a youth leadership program based in Watsonville that focuses on health in all policies and advocating for positive social change. So let's begin. We have so much to go through. So I'll state the first question. What are your shared values and what do you care about the most? To start the conversation, I'll read from Osvaldo and Miguel's response. Osvaldo said, "My shared values are trust and integrity. I care about equality for everyone. The meaning of these values have on me is that they make me stand up for injustices and help me have a different perspective on the way I view things. I care because I believe that everyone should have equality and be treated equally." And then the second response is going to be from Miguel. And he says, "I believe in a safe and prosperous community where people of all ages can succeed and live a happy life. This goal of mine comes with difficulties. I know it's a long shot, but as we move on in society, we must hold one another accountable and pull each other together. I hope to see a diverse community who work together to help make sure we are able to get the best results from our actions." I will now open it up to the panel. Once again, the question is, what are your shared values and what do you care most about?
Thank you. And thank you for that awesome introduction as well. For me, I think my main values are community care and loving one another. And I really resonated with what Miguel was saying about holding each other accountable and like calling each other in and building this community, because I really think that that's super necessary to make sure all members of our community feel seen and heard. And I think for me, these values mean that I need to recognize the areas where I have privilege and know when to step up and when to step back. So like stepping up when like I have lived experiences and like I know what I'm talking about this particular issue, and then stepping back when I can recognize that this is something that maybe my voice doesn't need to be centered on, and like uplifting those who know more about that or have more experience with it.
Does anyone else want to add?
Yeah, I really agree with Chloe, what Chloe said about bringing up the people's voices that need to be heard. That was really great. Thank you, Chloe. But some of my values are leadership, service, family, and faith. And the way that kind of started for me, my service background started with my grandparents. So they came to this country with nothing really. They didn't really know a lot of people. They just had some family that were in this country. They fled from Portugal, actually the Azores, which are islands of Portugal. And at that time, there was a lot of poverty. They were worried about getting food on the table, and they also fled environmental disaster. So there was an earthquake on the island next to them that actually caused like a ripple effect throughout their island chain. And when they came to this community, they, like I said, they had nothing. But it was the people of this community that backed them up and that pushed them up and helped them get jobs, helped them get communities, get connections to this community, helped them make friends. And that really inspired them to give back to this community that gave so much to them. And that was passed on down to my mom, who's now passed it on to me. And I grew up watching her serve in this community. And as I got older, I helped more and more with the stuff that she was doing. But today, in eighth grade, I was given an opportunity to lead and kind of speak on my own personal beliefs with the Aptos Community Youth Program. And that really changed kind of my life and the path that I'm on. I got to work with some of the issues that I care about, which are like community, which are giving back to our community and filling in those gaps that are like kind of the inequity, like helping kids who don't have enough, who don't have the tools that they need to be successful. Those are kind of some of the things I care about. So I'm really thankful to the Aptos Community Youth Program for giving me that opportunity. And another thing I want to speak about with leadership and service is it takes effort, it takes time, and it takes courage. And my advice would be to find something you care about and know your values so that you can get that done.
I really like your point on it takes courage to be a leader. Like that's, I think, a very important aspect that we forget often about. Kalia, do you have anything you want to add?
I definitely agree with Isaac. We definitely have to be courageous, especially more now than ever. There's so many issues and problems going on that I feel like everyone has to step up and do their part to change all these different things. I definitely agree. Like I come from a family where I'm first generation here. So I really care about being an advocate for my family because some of them can't vote, can't register, aren't legal here. So I definitely think that we have to be an advocate for those who aren't able to speak up or like be like, this is wrong, we need to change this. I really value that people who translate for other people when they don't know the language or interpreting different things. Because I know me, like growing up, I didn't know most of the things. Spanish was my primary language, my first language. So being in class, it was really hard, like knowing things. Like I had a lot of teachers who would be advocates for me, be like, okay, this is what it means, and this is like how you learn to speak English, like. And I definitely have to teach that to my dad because my dad is like, he's an immigrant. He came here. He was lucky enough to come here when they're giving out papers, which is many people don't have the opportunity. So I definitely think we have to like stand up for those who can't like speak up, who don't have the rights here in the United States.
Thank you, Kalia. And then thank you everyone else for your answers. Yeah, I'm really seeing like a trend and with you all speaking about like empathy and then understanding where everyone's coming from. So we sort of build a stronger community. Thank you all. So that kind of draws into the next question with understanding with what does equity mean to you? So I'll open it up to whoever wants to start that first. I'll read the response from Osvaldo. He said, as I said on my shared values, Everyone should be treated equally. Also, it means to me that equity is something that could be used to enjoy fully healthy life. Does anybody want to add on to what equity means to them?
Yeah, so I kind of disagree with that because he said giving everyone, like he talked about equality. And in the picture behind me, you can tell like when you give everyone the same thing, it doesn't really work out for everyone. So one of the big things about equity is it's personalized, it's individualized. And you can see in the picture, we're still using the same amount of boxes, but now everyone is getting benefit. So instead of giving everyone the same thing, which really doesn't work out for everyone, we're now giving everyone personalized and individualized care and the tools that they need to get what they want to get done. So you can see they gave the smaller child 2 boxes instead of 1, and now they can all see the game. And the tallest one didn't really need a box, but they gave it one anyway on this side. Now on this side, they gave his box to the younger child. And that kind of plays into what's going on right now. An example from me is I got a new computer for Christmas. And when school started, I was kind of excited to use my new computer. But the school gave me one anyways. And instead of giving me that computer, maybe they can invest that money in someone who needs a better computer or better Wi-Fi. So really the thing with equity is about personalized care, getting to know someone so that you can know what they need. And it takes, like I said earlier, it takes effort, it takes courage, but it's something that needs to be done.
Yeah, I completely agree with Isak on that. I think equity gets us on the road towards liberation or freedom. And I've actually seen that image that you had behind you. I've seen it with a third panel as well that is liberation or freedom, and the fence is just completely gone. And so I think equity, yes, like totally acknowledges privileges in places where support is needed, and then gives that support to the places where it's actually needed rather than giving it to everybody. But the ultimate goal is to break down the barriers in general. And so it's not going to be easy, and people are definitely going to feel left out. But at the end of the day, it's not treating everybody equally, but it's ending up with equal results, which I think is really important.
I definitely agree with you, Isaac and Chloe. I definitely think we need to target more on people who need those resources, like or so emotional support. Instead of giving everyone, because some people have access to emotional support, to like support in general, but we don't necessarily support those who need that support. And I definitely agree with you guys in that aspect. I didn't think about that in the beginning. I was like, everyone should be treated the same, but Isaac really opened my mind to like we need a primary, like our primary focus needs to be on those who actually need it.
Thank you all for your answers. I really like your point though, Chloe, about the third panel. I have seen that as well, and I totally like forgot about the third panel when you do bring down that fence, like that you are liberated, you're free. Everybody can see if there's nothing blocking you. So those are like a really awesome point. Okay. And then we'll go on to the third one. So what does youth leadership and activism look like to you? So this is like, okay, a very big question, very deep. So I'll give you guys a moment to think about that. And I'll read responses from Osvaldo and Miguel again. But yeah, think about this one, okay? What does youth leadership and activism look like to you? So the first written response is from Osvaldo, and he says, youth leadership and activism is the same as Jóvenes Sanos, which is an opportunity for the youth to have a voice in the community and make a change. This is important because the youth are the future leaders in the community and in the world. Some adults have the power to empower your voice and make change. All we need is supporters. And then Miguel's response is, as youth leaders, we would take people's concerns not only to take action upon them, but to make sure that the best decisions are being made to solve the problem. I hope to see the whole county and community benefit from our actions. Youth leadership is the way to go. We as teens should have the right to see problems being solved and that matter that benefit people of all ages. We are the future and hope to keep learning from adults, mentors, and to keep this community safe and united. Okay, those are the responses. So now, what does youth leadership and activism look like to you guys?
Youth leadership to me looks like standing up for, as I've mentioned before, standing up for those who aren't able to like speak out on certain issues or voice out their opinions, such as like standing up against the injustices we see today, like youth incarceration, immigration statuses, racism. Those are like big issues like that some people can't talk about because they're not allowed to talk about those things. For adults to support us, I think we just need a lot like resources and advocates for us in order to do those things. I know for youth it's kind of hard because sometimes we're like brought down or they just don't take our opinions into consideration because of the age gap, you know. People just think like, oh, you're young, like don't worry about it, you'll worry about it when you're older, but not really, because it affects us as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, Kalia. I think youth leadership and activism to me really is just the youth being able to speak their minds unapologetically about how they want to see their community taken care of. And I think it's super important to center what youth want because we're the ones who are going to be left with the consequences. And so I think speaking their minds about how they want to see their community taken care of, and then also like being able to actually do the actions to make that happen, whether that's like protesting or running for a particular office in your school or whatever it may be. I think a lot of times youth feel like we don't have power over our experiences, whether it's like an age thing, maybe you're not old enough to vote yet, or just like the structures in place. Like, I know for me, like I don't have a lot of say in how my school runs itself. Even if I were on student government or whatever, there's like certain administrators and things in place that prevent my voice from being heard in that. But when youth collectively speak out, there's like a lot less of a choice for that administration to listen to us. So yeah, I think we really deserve to have our voices heard. It's super important that our voices are heard. And it's also like super fundamental to creating a more equitable society. But in order for that to happen, we need adults to take us seriously, and we need them to see our voices as legitimate and credible, and to start lifting them up as if we're like actually colleagues and not students. So I think yeah, just treating youth like they're your actual colleagues, not tokenizing them and taking them really seriously. I think that's going to be the best way to get some youth activism that incites some really meaningful change in our community.
Yeah, so I agree with what Chloe and Kalia said about youth activism and leadership. But another thing that I would like to add about that is completely changing or something is not always possible, especially for youth. So I think another big part about youth leadership and youth activism is about improving things. And it's about speaking out and kind of being that nagging voice in adult leadership to help get change, to drive change. But it all starts with adults giving us a chance to do that change. So I feel like with my community, I have like a special, or not my community, my youth group, I have a special privilege because we do have an endowment fund. And we do have an entire community of people at St. John's Church that are backing us. But youth activism and youth leadership doesn't always need to have that. It can start with minimal resources because where there is a will, there is a way. Whether it's a coach or a teacher or a priest that, you know, youth can really get change, drive change. And it all starts with creating a safe space for youth where we can actually talk about problems that we have or things that we'd like to change, things that we'd like to fix. So it all starts with that. And you don't need a huge endowment fund. While it does help, you don't need that. It all starts with youth speaking up about issues that we have in our community, like we're doing right now. And that's a really big important thing in our community and in our youth activism. And it's also really about a combined relationship between youth and adults to get power done, to get change done.
Thank you all for your answers. Wow, those were really deep. I want to ask a question. When you're speaking about youth activism, and you said you like need the bare minimum, for somebody who wants to make a change, like where would you begin? Like what would be the first step for you if you wanted to change something? Do you have sort of like a baseline where you would start?
Yeah, so kind of like what I mentioned is starting with an adult, talking to an adult. As youth, we have a very unique and different perspective than the adults that are running things today are, especially with the digital era and like what we're experiencing now. So our voices are valuable. And the first step is for adults to acknowledge that power in our voice. But my first step would be, okay, let's say that our school bathrooms are dirty and it's really affecting students because we feel uncomfortable when we go to the bathroom. No one wants to go to the bathroom at school. The first thing I'd do would be to talk to a janitor about that. So someone that's directly experiencing that every day. So I'd talk to the janitor first, hey, what can we do about this? Why is this happening? And what are some of the things that are impacting this? And well, his response is, well, students are doing this to themselves. They're doing bad stuff in the bathroom. They're putting toilet paper on the wall. They're drawing on the walls. And so that's the first thing. And if he doesn't have the power to do that, if that mid-level person doesn't have the power to do that, then you go talk to your principal. For example, my principal, Miss Pugh. Hey, Miss Pugh, the bathrooms are really dirty. Can we work on that and try and change that? Well, and she says, well, I don't have power to do that. Maybe go talk to the district supervisor. And then you go talk to the district supervisor. And it's about getting your voice out there to as many people as possible so that we bring awareness to this. But like I said, it all starts, you can change that problem yourself, like at the school, just by encouraging people to be safer in the bathroom and make better choices in the bathroom. But it's not always like that. So I would say the first step would be to talk to as many people as possible about it.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I definitely want to add that I think youth have the power to empower each other as well and make change without needing like an adult present as well. Although I totally agree with what you were saying, especially within the school realm. But I think more generally speaking, if you have an issue that you want to tackle and it feels really big, I think the first thing is just to talk to anybody who you think would be an ally on this with you, any of your friends or whoever it might be who like agrees and sees this issue with you, and then start developing like an action, like tangible actions that you can do. And they might not be very big things, but whether it's like talking to that janitor or maybe you want to plan like a little protest, or maybe you just want to spread the word on social media and you need to make like a flyer to post on your Instagram or something. But just seeing what your abilities are and then making a to-do list from there, I think will make the problem feel a lot less big and a lot easier to tackle than when you're first like thinking about it and it's like, oh my gosh, this problem is huge, I don't know what to do. I think breaking it down into things that you actually can do is a huge part of the process, and then that can help you tackle that bigger problem. But when it comes down to it, you're just going to chip away at it piece by piece. So I think making that to-do list is important.
Thank you for your responses. Yeah, I find that really like helpful to understand also as well, like bringing in your other allies, other youth. I think it's something really strong to point out that you're stronger when you have more individuals together. Because even if you mentioned before, even when adults aren't letting you in, when they're not talking to you, if you have more of your peers with you, it makes you a stronger collective group. Thank you for your answers. We'll move on to the next question now. What advice or thoughts would you offer the adults in your school or community whose job it is to create environments for you to thrive, learn, and succeed? We have one written response from Osvaldo, and he says, In order for the youth to be successful, all they need is a safe and healthy community they could be in to achieve their goals. Does anybody want to tackle this first? What advice do you have?
The advice that I would offer to adults is to give the same energy you give to one student to another student. Mostly because sometimes we don't know what is going on a day-to-day basis in their lives. I often see like teachers kind of be like, "Oh, you didn't do your homework. Well, that's too bad." But they never ask the question like, "Why is that? Why aren't they staying on top of things? Is there something else going on?" Instead of just focusing on the fact that they didn't do their homework. The grade is just gonna be an F, you know. I want to see, and like I want others to know, it's like we need to help students, mostly because we don't know what's going on on their day-to-day basis. We don't know their struggles. We don't know if they have the resources to feed their families, or like something else, like maybe rent, like they don't have enough for rent. Like obviously that student is gonna like worry as well as their parents. So I think like teachers shouldn't punish the students for not succeeding like the others are. I think they should their main focus should be like on helping the student catch up with the rest of the students. So as a class, they're like successful in whatever aspect they want to go to, it, like, or pathway they want to go to through life.
That's a really good point, Talia. I really like that you're talking about how you want teachers to see the student as a collective whole person with backgrounds, with stories, with a history behind themselves, and not just like a student in the classroom taking a test. Like there's so much more to the student. So yeah, thank you for that. Do you feel that strongly though, like in your classroom settings, Talia, that there is like a different way that teachers treat certain students? Have you noticed that for many years?
Yeah, I've personally had that experience happen to me. I was struggling for a while in middle school, and when I would ask for help, or like they wouldn't give me the same energy like that they would give to someone who's succeeding. They would be like, "Oh, like here's more resources," but to me it was like, you know what, just catch up. Like, you know, like it was very vague, and to the point of how they helped me compared to another student who was succeeding. They would offer them like help, or like different like after school programs to go to, you know, that they could help them potentially in the future. But me, that happened to me, like I was struggling, they didn't give me those resources. And now that I'm like at a good place, I see that happen to many other students as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's unfortunate that had to happen to you. But yeah, I think that's also interesting that you're able to reflect on it and see it now in different ways. And I think that's sort of like an interesting place to be in. That when you move on in life, that you're able to reflect and see sort of different injustices and different like acts happening to other individuals. Thank you for your response. Does anybody else have anything they want to add, or anything advice they would like to share to adults?
Yeah, so like Kalia mentioned earlier, youth have very unique perspectives and experiences in life than the adults that we're dealing with had when they were youth. So I feel like the biggest thing for adults can do for youth is to hear us and listen to us. And a thing that goes with that is youth often have very big ideas. So an example of that is, you know, we see all these really unfortunate things happening with our climate right now, especially with the fires. And youth say, well, let's change that. Let's get rid of gas cars. But oftentimes those goals are unattainable, or they're unrealistic to happen. They're unrealistic. So a thing that adults can do is to kind of work with us. So let's say, well, maybe we can't get rid of all gas cars, but maybe it can start with you at home. Or, hey, maybe that adult's in a teacher. Let's say, hey, maybe we can't do that, but one thing we can do is start a recycling bin at our school, and a recycling thing at our school. Or hey, let's grow a garden together and let's share healthy food with our students. So it's about adults hearing youth and working with youth to kind of bridge that gap between youth and adults. And another thing I'd like to see in the future, which is a part of this question, is youth having more of a voice in our community. Like Chloe mentioned earlier, a voice in the change that happens in our school. So one thing that was mentioned when I went to the Youth Institute training was having a youth council at city meetings. So let's like that. For example, at a school, when a student's getting suspended or is going to have an expulsion, maybe we have a council of students that is there to be a part of that process. Like Kalia mentioned earlier, maybe something's going on at home. Maybe we know that student, or we know what's going on at home. We know what that student might be experiencing. So we have a value perspective that can bring to the table. So let's say these group of students rule to maybe not suspend that student, but to get him in touch with a counselor or another program or resource that can really change his life. So the biggest thing is adults being willing to hear us, because we have powerful experiences and powerful voices, and it's just about listening to us.
Yeah, I totally agree. I just want to echo what Kalia and Isak have said. I think it's super important to check in on your students or any adult who's working with a group of youth. Like, check in on them and make sure you know what's going on in their lives. And I know I said it before, but I just want to circle back to, like, treat them like your colleagues rather than like people that are lower than you on like the social ladder or whatever. Don't tokenize or patronize them. Like, actually treat them as if they're one of your peers. Like, just like you would notice if something was up with your coworker and they started slacking off, notice that when that's happening in the classroom too. And also, like, just like you would listen to the ideas of your coworker or your peer, like, listen to the ideas of your students and of the youth that are around you. Don't just assume what people need or what issues people care about, because I think you'd be really surprised what youth have like the desire to do and to change. And I think what's stopping a lot of that change right now is just an inability to listen on the behalf of the adults. And then also this like consistent need to take away credibility from youth and like make sure that, oh, well, you have to prove that this is what you experience, and like, oh, have other students gone through that, and things like that, when really like we should just believe students, because why would they lie? And like, this is their experience. Like, if a student or a youth is being vulnerable with you and explaining like what needs to change in order to better their chances at success, I see no reason why that shouldn't be taken seriously, and why an adult wouldn't get behind this youth to like help support them in whatever way they could. And then lastly, I think it's super important for adults to deconstruct those power hierarchies that exist, because even if you're like the coolest adult ever, youth aren't going to feel like they can be their authentic selves with you if you don't make that clear. So I think that always starts with setting like community values and rules as a collective, rather than just like this is what we're going to do. But then also it comes down to how you actually interact with these youth. Like, how do you talk to them? Do you listen when they're speaking? Do you listen to their ideas? Do you uplift their ideas when you have the opportunities to? And I think if adults were able to commit to doing that, we would see some really amazing change, both in our educational system and then also just in society at large, because youth right now are growing up in such a tumultuous period with like economic depressions, a global pandemic, race, things are going off the chart right now, like everything, climate change, everything is happening at once. And when it comes down to it, the most vulnerable youth, which tend to be Black and Indigenous youth and youth of color, when we center their needs, like we end up like encompassing all of these problems that we really need to solve as a society. So I think just listening to what the youth need and uplifting their voices and taking them super seriously is really important.
Wow, thank you for your answer. Wow, this is really in-depth. Thank you all for your answers. I want to follow up on that though. If the adults, which they should, take all the advice that you've given, and they follow it full-heartedly, how would you see the society change or our county changing in 5 years if they do exactly everything that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think for one, we wouldn't see conversations like this happening, where we need to like talk about how to best handle adult and youth relationships, because they would just be seen as relationships. They would just be seen as like I would just see these adults as accomplices and allies helping me get the job done, and they would see me the same way. And then also I think it would just be such a more welcoming society, such a more welcoming school environment. I think we would see a lot more really creative ways of learning, and of testing that knowledge. And I think we'd see like a lot more creative solutions to things like the climate crisis, to things like racial tensions on campuses and in our community in general. I think we'd just see a lot more integration of like ideas and practices that both youth and adults use in order to form like this really loving community that all listens to one another.
I definitely agree with you, Chloe. We need to like stop the separation between youth and adult, because we definitely see that a lot. Like I know in my family, like if youth, like us being smaller than adults, it's like we have to be quiet. We have to learn to be quiet. If we don't be quiet, it's like we get shamed at home. Like, why do you talk about that? That's definitely what happens in my family. And I know that not just in my family, but many other families, youth are taught to be quiet. So yeah, I definitely agree with you that we need to change things. We're gonna have more conversations with adults and youth if they take our advice, like stop the separation, kind of target what needs to be targeted, like the racism, youth incarceration, immigration. Like it has to start somewhere. It might as well be within our communities as a whole. Target small like aspects and then head on to bigger things in life that could actually make that big change happen.
I agree with both of you guys, but I feel like that what you guys are talking about starts early. So it starts in the elementary age or the junior high age, with giving students a space where they feel like they can speak out, where they feel like they can make change. That kind of all starts with adult mentors and like youth programs like I'm a part of. I feel like if adults took our advice, we'd see a lot more youth programs and a lot more adult youth mentorships, so that we can give youth a space where they feel like they can talk about the issues that are going on in our world and at home. And it also open up a lot more resources for youth to have, like like mental health youth resources, school resources like getting headphones, pens, pencils, paper, school supplies, binders. Binders are a really big thing, and computers and Wi-Fi. So I feel like we'd see a lot more youth programs and adult youth mentorships that would really drive change in our community, and that would help get a lot of work done, and a lot of communication would come out of that.
Thank you all for your answers. I just want to jump on Kalia's point with family. I think that's like very important to mention, since we've talked so much about in the education system and with teachers. We forget too that there's like different aspects of society outside of school. And I would like to add, like from my own experiences too, there is like a hierarchy in the family with like youth and like don't be heard, don't be like, you should be seen and not like heard. And so I just like that point you made. I also want to jump on Isaac's point with resources, because that follows up on my next question. If you just let me ask you one last question, everybody. So after everything I've heard from all of you about youth and adult relationships being stronger, being more equal, being more allies, and like just fight into making positive change in society, how do you imagine a more resilient Santa Cruz County? And in that county, what resources would you like to add? What resources are lacking in this county? we'll open that up to anybody. I'll let you give you a moment though to think. I'm sorry.
Well, I was kind of already thinking about that with the last question. But especially right now, something I didn't talk about with the COVID-19 pandemic and the wildfires and all the racial injustice that's going on. It's exposed a lot of inequities and a lot of gaps in our society that people feel every day. And the COVID-19 pandemic has really highlighted that. One of the things we're seeing is kids having access to Wi-Fi and good computers. Not a lot of people have to drive to their school with their parents and sit in the parking lot just to get their homework done. A lot of people have siblings, and when they're doing their homework, there's a lot of background noise because like at my house, I have 3 other siblings. There's 3 other classrooms in my house that are all right next to me going on around at once. So kids feeling like they don't have the tools or the resources that they need to get work done is a big gap that we have right now. So some of the things that I'd like to see in the future are some safe spaces for youth to talk and get work done. Mentorships that are gonna help youth kind of talk about their issues and decompress after school and stuff like that. And just kind of safe spaces for youth, like I talked about earlier, safe spaces for youth. That is a very big, important thing that youth are lacking right now. And I feel like that should be something that is implemented in our county in the future.
Definitely agree with you, Isaac. We do need safe places to go, but I also think that we need more resources for mental health. There's a lot of mental health issues going on, especially now with COVID, the fires, immigration, and like many more. And some people like get affected by that because I know I feel sometimes really down, like seeing the fires going on outside. It's like it gets dark. You hear people like losing their homes. It's definitely takes a big toll on our mental health. So I think we need more resources to help that aspect, to help those who are feeling like anxiety or depression, because it is a big issue that we don't talk about, and like youth and many others need those resources within the county.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I was immediately thinking about healthcare in general when this question was asked. I think, especially with the pandemic, we've just seen how many inconsistencies there are in our healthcare system and how it's like really, really difficult for some people to get healthcare. And I also think when I think about Santa Cruz, what comes to mind right away is our houseless population. So I think a more resilient Santa Cruz would spend a lot more money on healthcare systems, as well as like shelters for the houseless and support for the houseless in our community. I think that healthcare, especially mental health care right now, is huge because it really just feels like the world is ending. And it's like every day there's another piece of bad news, and it's like hard to want to keep going about your day like everything's normal when it's not. So I think that's really important. And then I also think we would spend a lot more money on youth spaces, like Isak was saying, like really safe spaces, but making sure that BIPOC youth are centered in these spaces and are centered in education, because when we center the needs of those youth, it comes down to equity. When we center the needs of those youth, like everybody succeeds at a higher level. So I think that would be really important. And I also envision a Santa Cruz where youth don't have to try exponentially harder to get their voices heard or acknowledged when it comes to making changes in our community. Like they would just be able to have a say like everybody else, whether that would be through voting or like whether there would be like a youth appointed person on city council or whatever it may be, but they wouldn't have to try as hard as we have to try now to get little things done.
Yeah, I agree with Chloe. What Chloe said is getting youth voices kind of more out there in the community, like with like a community representative, like in our at our council meetings, because we need more voices, youth voices that need to be heard. We have a lot of youth voices that need to be heard, and addressing those issues by using youth voices is extremely important to our society.
Wow, thank you all for your wonderful and depth answers. Left me speechless. I have no more questions. So yeah, thank you all for your answers. Thank you all for your dedication and your participation in this work over the past couple weeks. Thank you all. I would like the audience to know that, yeah, we have worked together for a while in developing these questions and then just in developing this event and this panel. So I want to thank you all again. Oh my God, I can't thank you enough. And I look forward to continuing this momentum of amplifying youth voices and youth leadership. And I really do hope that we do get a youth city council and we do get a youth county board. I know there was youth city council before in the past. And so I hope that gets restarted again and gets more involved. And thank you all. I really hope too, all the adults listening, all teachers, mentors really took note how strong and how important relationships are with youth and how they should be more equal and more together. Shouldn't be a hierarchy. Yeah, thank you all for your participation. Thank you all for watching. And I will now hand it off to Daniel and Chloe. Thank you.
Thank you to all the youth panelists. We greatly appreciate your thought, leadership, and how you reimagine a resilient Santa Cruz County. We know that we are living in an unprecedented time, and while we do not have all the answers, we know how important your voice is as we create long-term sustainable and equitable change in our community. Thank you. Gracias.
And now for our last session of the day, we would like to welcome Kalia Vasquez, a YVPN intern and junior at Harbor High School, Gabriela Sanchez, the United Way Community Impact Coordinator for Jóvenes Sanos, and Amanda Gambin, the United Way Community Impact Coordinator for the Youth Violence Prevention Network. They will be taking us through the next phase of the network.
Thank you so much, Chloe and Daniel. 2020 marks the 5-year anniversary of the release of Santa Cruz County's first Youth Violence Prevention Strategic Plan and the start of Project Thrive. And over the past 7 months, to inform the next phase of this multidisciplinary collaborative, the Youth Violence Prevention Network has been gathering input from the community, system leaders, and youth. And what we've heard is that we need to amplify youth voices, address racial inequities, and support youth in further developing and fostering leadership skills. We know how important this work is to continue and to explore because we are aware of the issues youth continue to face in our community, such as youth not involved in the decision-making process that directly affects them, the systemic barriers for youth to succeed, and youth often being tokenized.
With that being said, in this new network, we plan to center youth in all of our work while incorporating racial equity in all that we do. In the next phase, we will want to continue our commitment to foster and create an equitable, united, and safe county, while all of our youth are engaged and have the opportunity to thrive in our community. We plan to do so with the Youth Action Network. We have decided to change our name because we are more than violence, prevention, and acknowledge all the intersectional aspects that it takes for youth to thrive and succeed in their transition into adulthood. The goal of the Youth Action Network is to create a space where existing and new youth groups can come together to collaborate, build their capacity, and create positive social change in our community. We are still exploring what the structure would look like. We do know that shifts we would like to make.
The Youth Action Network is planning to make the following shifts. Shift from adults deciding what's best for youth to centering youth voice and leadership to decide what is best for our youth. Shift from siloed youth groups and youth leadership councils to a collaborative youth network across Santa Cruz County. Shift the narrative that youth are disinterested, disengaged, to youth are leading efforts for social change. Shift from us adults versus them youth to building a shared sense of community and belonging. Imagine the Youth Action Network, a space where youth groups can build their capacity, a space to support the next generation of social justice leaders and activists across the county, where youth can create strong relationships with adults and across generations. The Youth Action Network could increase youth being supported by caring adults, increase youth meaningful participation in the community, civic engagement, and increase leadership skills and social capital.
And admittedly, as we started to embark on the next phase of the planning process, no one could have foreseen the fires, COVID-19, nor predicted the economic and social impacts that it would have on our community. And the reality is that we may have to scale back a bit for the next few years as we reimagine and rebuild a thriving community. That being said, now more than ever, we are narrowing our focus to center youth and continue to advocate to reduce duplication of efforts, align, partner, and leverage resources. And we don't have all the answers yet, but we are committed to co-creating the Youth Action Network with youth and other adult allies within our network. We are being responsive to the ever-changing environment. We are also still exploring how the traditional youth violence prevention network will look like and the role it will play. And we are still having conversations with those who are committed to driving forward equitable systems change and how we can leverage all of our lessons learned from Project Thrive. And we hope to know more in the next few months. Stay tuned to learn more about the details of what the Youth Action Network will look like.
Thank you to everyone who was able to be here today. We acknowledge your deep commitment to youth and are excited to embark on this new chapter of the network with you all.
The Youth Action Network is planning to convene in the fall to discuss next steps moving forward. We invite you to join us in this conversation. Stay tuned for more updates and next steps soon. Please fill out the post-event survey in the chat box. Please feel free to reach out to the Youth Action Network if you have any questions. Contact information is listed in the event program.
Gracias, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on this special event. Feel free to check in with one another, ask any questions. Again, gracias. Thank you, everybody. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you again, everyone. Wishing you a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks for spending your afternoon with us.